policies, goals, and priority objectives. You should have a copy of Shipman and Goodwin's notes. All right, so policy 5010, student policies, goals, and priority objectives. Shipman and Goodwin feel that this policy is not necessary and they recommend repealing it. The policy addresses student goals and is more appropriate for a position statement rather than a board policy. If the board wishes to retain this policy, we recommend review to ensure it aligns with the district's vision statement and profile of graduate. So they recommend rescission. Is there any discussion about policy 5010?
No, I mean, as I read it, I agreed that it seemed more like a position statement to me.
All right. So we'll recommend that one for rescission.
Yeah.
Policy 5020, equal educational opportunity. This policy is not necessary and we recommend repeal. In addition, this policy addresses opportunity for maximum educational development and is better suited for a position statement. So Shipman and Goodwin recommend rescission. Is there any discussion about policy 5020? No. Policy 5030. Assignment of students to schools. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repeal because the policy is unnecessary. If we wish to retain the policy, they recommend administrative review to ensure that the policy is still applicable and further legal review to ensure legal compliance regarding issues, including but not limited to its restriction on bus transportation. Dr. Cook, do you have an opinion on 5030?
It's covered in other areas. I think it would be fine to. It is. I will say we follow that in terms of the transportation. If a student, for some reason is going to attend Ryerson, they live in the Jeffrey area. We do not provide transportation. We go through a process with them to make that decision. We're going to grant that, but we'd be fine with repealing.
Okay. Any further discussion? Policy 5030.1, intra-district school attendance areas. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing this policy because it is unnecessary and outdated. If the board wishes to retain this policy, we recommend the policy be consolidated with all policies regarding school attendance areas. The policy addresses the major goals to be met when designing such areas, and that the administration be authorized to develop procedures for making decisions regarding inter-district school assignments.
This is, I do have one on inter-district. I don't have one on intra-district. That would be fine.
Any discussion about 5030.1? 5030.2, inter-district school attendance areas. So Shipman and Goodwin said about this particular policy, this policy is not mandatory and we recommend repeal. It does not appear that a choice program is currently operational through Learn or in conjunction with New London. We are happy to review existing information about the program and provide policy guidance if the program continues to operate. So I wanted to ask you, Dr. Cook, is there a choice program through Learn?
There is not. So the policy would at minimal need a rewrite. There is a program through ACES in New Haven, and we would like to bring to the board consideration of participating in that program. We have been offered in the past, and you can see this goes back quite a while, so 1999 and reviewed in 2006. So the district felt that there was some benefit from those programs to participation of, and we think that's something the board should consider for potentially next school year. My plan, I talked to the executive committee about this, was to bring this forward around October timeframe.
Okay, so do you want to just set this one aside for now until we
That would be great. That would be my recommendation, because it could be a rewrite rather than a rescission.
So we'll wait until after you bring that forward.
Thank you.
Any other discussion?
No.
Policy number 5040, school census. Shipman and Goodwin recommend the board consider repealing this policy because it is unnecessary. State law outlines Board of Ed responsibilities for participating in PSIS.
So we do that every year, that we do not need a policy to do that.
Any discussion? No? Great. So how easy it is. Okay, we're up to policy 5060.3 withdrawal from school / dropouts. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing this policy as it overlaps with policy 5113, student attendance truancy and chronic absenteeism, and the accompanying regulations. They recommend having just one policy for consistency and legal compliance. So, and we did do 5113 recently.
Yes.
So we will recommend that for rescission as well. We'll just make one motion at the end. So now we are to policy 5070.1. 5070.1 is the assignment of new students to classes and grade levels. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing this policy because it is not mandatory. This topic concerns district operations, and it is best included in a regulation or school procedures. If the board wishes to retain this policy, they recommend internal review to ensure that the policy is still being implemented as it was adopted in 1995, and additional legal review of the student transfer provisions. So do we have a regulation regarding the assignment of students to classes and grade levels? Or is it just, administration?
It's, we do not have a regulation. I do not believe we do have a procedure by the school building. So we look at the prior education. We just went through a process where we had an international student come through, and the state helps out then with review of transcripts when we go through, a process, and there is testing if needed to determine.
So we have a school procedure in place, so this is not needed.
Yep.
So any discussion about 5070.1?
No.
5070.2. Assignment of former homeschooled students to classes. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing this policy because it is not mandatory. This topic concerns district operations and is best included in a regulation or school procedures. The board wishes to retain this policy. We recommend additional legal review as it identifies criteria for admission that may run afoul of the school accommodation law. Further recommendation is to consolidate policy 6080.23 homeschooling if that policy is retained. So policy 6080.23 homeschooling was revised May 18th of 2010. So my question regarding 5070.2 would we delay rescinding this policy until we actually review 6080.23?
I mean, I think it would make sense to make sure that we are covering all our bases.
Maybe we can do it together, we can delay this one and do it with the other one, just to make sure that we're
Yeah.
being consistent.
Yeah.
So we'll delay this one.
When do you keep, I know you transcribe.
You know, it's right there.
Okay.
Yes. I'll remember to. Okay, we are up to policy number 5080.1 tardiness. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing this policy because it is not mandatory. This topic concerns day-to-day operations and is best included in a regulation or school procedures. If the board wishes to retain this policy, they recommend internal review to confirm that the policy is still being implemented as it was last reviewed in 2015. So I'm assuming this also, there's a sort of administrative
Correct.
policy, and so we don't need to formal for that policy. Is there a regulation on it or just a
School policy.
Any discussion about 5080.1? No. Policy 5080.2.1, attendance records and monitoring. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing this policy as it overlaps with policy 5113, student attendance, truancy, and chronic absenteeism, and the accompanying regulations. This policy addresses day-to-day operations for attendance reporting and monitoring. We recommend internal administrative review and adoption of the school regulation or procedure. So do we have a regulation on this, or is it just like administrative policy or procedure? And we don't need a regulation.
No.
Okay. Any discussion on 5080.2.1? No. 5090.1. Student due process rights. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing this policy as it overlaps with policy 5110.4 student discipline and policy 5020.1 non-discrimination. They recommend one policy in each area for consistency and legal compliance. So they recommend rescinding this policy. 59.1, any discussion? 1590.1.2, age of majority / emancipated minors. Shipman and Goodwin recommend that the board consider repealing this policy because it is unnecessary. State law outlines the effects of emancipation. Discussion? Policy 5090.1.4, student misconduct in schools. They recommend repealing this policy as it overlaps with policy 5110.4, student discipline. And they recommend again just one policy for consistency and legal compliance.
And the board will remember that our code of conduct was updated to remove these next few because the student discipline policy covers them.
Yes.
We'll do that for this year.
All right, we are up to 1590.3.2. Vandalism. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing this policy as it overlaps with policy 5110.4, student discipline. And we're using that together. Any discussion? None. Okay, up to 1590.3.3, student conduct on school buses. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing this policy as it overlaps with policy 5110.4, student discipline, which we recommend be updated with the forthcoming model policy revisions that clarify the district's discipline policy applies to student behavior on school transportation. So actually, we revised policy 5110.4, student discipline on January 4th of 2022. And under section 2, the scope of the student discipline policy, it does include wording for school transportation to be included in the policy. So we have covered those bases. Great. So we can feel free to rescind 5090.3.3 student conduct on school buses. Any further discussion? Nope. Please, it's easy. 1590.3.6.1 hazing. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing this policy as it overlaps with policy 5110.4, student discipline. To the extent that the policy prohibits faculty or staff from allowing or encouraging hazing activities, we recommend that such matter be addressed in an employee handbook. So my question to you, Dr. Cook, is do we have an employee handbook, and is there something about hazing?
We have a student handbook, and hazing is part of the school discipline policy.
So I'm not really sure why they talked about employee there because we're under students,
Right.
but I guess just to cover their bases, if you're covering it for students, you should cover it for faculty. Do you know if you have anything for the employees? I think I would have to look up the policy under staff.
We don't have a employee handbook. We do provide them policies.
Well, I think with regards to students in this particular policy, we can feel free to rescind it, but we can look into
Right.
whether or not there's something included in employee
Right.
training or something. That
I know it's included in training for coaches, because that's a lot of places where hazing
Right.
comes up as athletics.
Can we just?
Sure. Yes.
But regarding students under 5090.3.6.1, we can agree to rescind this? Yes. Policy 5090.8, weapons and dangerous instruments. Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing this policy as it overlaps with policy 5110.4 through discipline for consistency and legal compliance. Any discussion? Getting there. Policy 5100.1.2, the Equal Access Act. Shipman and Goodwin state this policy is not mandatory. They recommend repeal. If the board wishes to maintain this policy, they recommend review to ensure legal compliance. They have no comparable policy of their own, and this was adopted in August of 2005. So it is unnecessary, and they recommend repeal. Any discussion on equal access plans? I think so many of these are covered, somewhere
Yeah.
else, and they're just, not necessary. All right, so policy 5120.4.2.7, racial harassment of students. Shipman and Godin recommend repealing this policy as duplicative of the existing policy 5020.1, non-discrimination. Any discussion? No. Okay, so now I want to go to policy 5220, which is a new policy to improve completion rates of the FAFSA. Do people actually say FAFSA?
FAFSA.
Do they?
They call that.
Yeah, I don't know what it sounds, okay. So I actually have two here. One is policy 5220, new policy, and we have 5220R, the regulation for it. And do we have any discussion about this policy? Did you want to add? anything
Sure.
to that?
Yeah, so had discussions with high school principal and assistant superintendent. We have in Madison, one of the highest FAFSA completion rates in the state. So this was a big push by the governor and the commissioner of education a couple of years back, and so the resulting law came in. We do work with our families on that. We support them and give them information and tell them about guidelines. School counseling puts out information. So I think we would certainly recommend the adoption to Mr. Salvatore and Ms. Donna Hedge. We're supportive of that. We do not feel we need the reg. We do many of those. We do those things already, actually, all of them. In certain ways, except for the incentive piece, and that's if funding permits.
Yeah, I kind of felt like that was an unnecessary addition.
For that, I think that, like I said, we get a really strong completion rate of that set.
So do you want to not have the regulation at all?
Yeah.
Seems kind of.
Yeah.
All right, so no reg.
And where it says coaches or task force, that's done through school counseling. So
Okay.
it just kind of makes it a little bit more, I feel like, using new terminology for people who are already doing the work, so it could be confusing.
Right. So just so everyone is aware, policy 5220, improve completion rates of the pre-application for federal student aid, FAFSA, is in accordance with Public Act number 31-199. Boards of education must adopt a policy to improve completion rates of the FAFSA by students enrolled in grade 12 or an adult education program maintained by the board. So do we have any further discussion about policy 5220? Or we can recommend it to go for a first read to the board at the next. Next.
Right. No, that's fine, but
And I just have one question, we know that it's in accordance with Public Act number 31-199. But the legal references on the bottom of the Connecticut General Statutes, I was just wondering if it should say anywhere in here that in accordance with Public Act number, should that be in it, do you think?
We don't typically do that because eventually the public act become a
Section.
section.
Okay.
So,
All right. All right, so any further discussion about 5220?
none.
Okay, so now we're gonna go to the first one on our list, which is policy 2250, crisis management. And so Shipman and Goodwin suggested review of the district's safety and security plan, the physical restraint and seclusion policy, the suicide prevention policy, and the safe school climate policy to determine if this policy is necessary or is duplicative. Each school's safety and security plan is updated yearly as prescribed by the Department of Emergency Management Services. And all mentioned policies are revised in accordance with Shipman's updates as they are received. Shipman does not have a comparable policy and it is not mandatory. They suggest that policy 2250 crisis management be repealed. So I did look up our other policies. We have policy 5144 physical restraint / seclusion / exclusionary timeout that was last revised March 5th of 2019. We have a suicide prevention policy number 5120.4.2.1 called suicide prevention, which was last revised February 8th, 2006. So that one is due definitely for revision. I would have to take a look or have Shipman and Goodwin take a look if they want it revised in 2019 to see if they feel that one needs to be updated at all. So I would not want to do anything with the crisis management policy 2250 until we look at the other ones. We did do the school climate policy 5131.914. We revised that recently, April 5th of 2022. So that one is definitely up to date and very comprehensive. So I would not want to, I think, get rid of crisis management yet until we do what Shipman and Goodwin suggests that we do. So we will put on for future policy, definitely the suicide prevention policy. I was looking at that one anyway for the next meeting. And then look into the physical restraint and seclusion policy. And then regarding the safety and security plan, we have to do that yearly anyway, so we know that that one is definitely updated. So that's not a problem. So it's just the two policies, 5144 and 5120.4.2.1 that we want to look into before we take care of 2250. So we will put this one aside, and so we will do the other two. We'll do the three together. I agree. Yep. Any further discussion? No. Okay. Woo. All right, so then I would just want a motion to recommend from the policy committee to put forward to the Board of Ed for a first read for rescission of policy 5010, student policy schools prior objectives, policy 5020, equal educational opportunity, policy 5030, assignment of students to schools, policy 5030.1, intra-district school attendance areas, policy 5040, school census, policy 5060.3, withdrawal from school / dropouts, policy 5070.1, assignment of new students to classes and grade levels, policy 5080.1, tardiness, policy 5080.2.1, attendance records and monitoring, policy 5090.1, student due process rights, policy 5090.1.2, age of majority emancipated minors, policy 5090.1.4, student misconduct in schools, policy 5090.3.2, vandalism, policy 5090.3.3, student misconduct on school buses, policy 5090.3.6.1, hazing, policy 5090.8, weapons and dangerous instruments, policy 5100.1.2, equal access act, and policy 5120.4.2.7, racial harassment of students. Can I have a motion?
I make the motion to rescind the policies as mentioned in sequence.
And I second.
by Diane.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and then I will need a motion to put forward, not for rescission, but for review for adoption, policy 5220, policy to improve completion rates of the past stuff.
Yes.
I move, I second, let's vote. Aye. Excellent. And that completes our agenda. Public comment? No one. Great. No public comment? Okay. Then if there's nothing else, we can move to adjourn at 6:54.
I will just share. Oh,
Go ahead.
There are several new policies as we shared with the board. The legislator did a lot to us last session. And so there'll be several similar to FAFSA. So Wendy and I will work with Diane to try and put the ones most urgent, I guess, in for the next meeting. And try and, sprinkle them in throughout the rest of the time. Some are not, effective till July 1, some are effective, immediately. So
Okay, so that's pretty much like the priority is the ones that come in that are urgent will go first. We're trying to clean house with rescissions of old policies that are outdated. And then kind of get the ones that were missed in between. And also look at the 9000 series.
Right.
But if there's anything in particular, we have those two that I mentioned, especially the suicide prevention policy that we definitely want to look at. There are a lot of policies that are outdated and have not been revised in a very long time, so we're going to try to get to as many as possible. So it's going to be an active policy here. Ready. All right. So now we can adjourn at 6:55. Thank you, everyone.
thank you.